Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends. I'm really excited for today's episode. We are going to talk about pleasure. Pleasure, sex, feeling really good, and just enjoying being in our bodies are such yummy, important parts of marriage. And I'm really excited today to bring this special treat to you all with a very special guest here to talk with me about pleasure and why it matters and what it is even, why I even thinking about it as like a revolutionary act in our world and in our marriages to embrace it, and what blocks it in our lives and how we can invite more of it, both sexual and otherwise, into our lives and marriages. So let me introduce to you Danielle Savory, who even has an amazing name for the work that she does. It's so fun to have her here. We've been in each other's worlds for maybe like the last 8 years or so. I think so. Yeah. Which has just been so fun to watch each other grow. And it's just been a pleasure. And actually you were my coach. I worked with you for a little while, which was wonderful. Mm-hmm. So to introduce her more specifically, Danielle is a sex and pleasure coach for women. And she uses her background in neuroscience and somatics, mindfulness, and mind-body coaching to bring it all together for women. So hello, Danielle, and a huge welcome to you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And yeah, it feels so big. Like you said, like eight years in each other's world. And here we are having this conversation. So I'm honored and just grateful to be here.
So grateful to have you. Yay. So I want to just start off by defining pleasure, like what it is and what it isn't. And I want to actually just like say a few words first before I offer you that, because you're the expert in this. But I do want to say, like, I think we can sometimes, the word pleasure can maybe mean a lot of different things or be construed in a lot of different ways, right? And I want to just like what I think is the kind of the true kind of pleasure that we're talking about today is a little bit different than what people, some might think of when they first hear the word pleasure, right? And I just wanted to offer like sort of a short little definition of what like some in the coaching world, I think this term was coined by Brooke Castillo, call false pleasure. And false pleasure, it's like any indulgence, like any pleasurable sort of indulgence, that's when it's done in excess causes a net negative result in our lives. Whereas what I'm thinking about, what we're talking about today, and you correct me where I'm wrong, is like a pleasure that, something that feels satisfying and enjoyable, but then also genuinely adds to our well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that definition. And, it is hard. I think a lot of people have a very false idea of what pleasure is, or even just put pleasure into a category with sex. And for me, and even how the dictionary definition defines it, is it's really just a feeling of like happiness and satisfaction and enjoyment. And I like to think of it as delight. And even though we can maybe have these experiences, like what you said with these false pleasures or these buffering activities, they don't lead to a more experience of wholeness. They don't lead to an experience of like feeling fully human or totally incorporated or like really genuinely satisfied. They're fleeting, they come and go. And even though sex can and sometimes is put in that category, the way that we're really approaching pleasure here is that it is for your overall well-being, and it's a nourishing thing that we can tune into and really help create like internal resources and traits that can serve us in our life.
I love that. Yes, which is a little bit different than just like eating a full pint of Ben and Jerry's.
Yes, totally.
I mean, that's pretty pleasurable, but
yes. Can't be until the stomach.
Right. Well, maybe not the full pint, right?
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah. Beautiful. So this is like my big question to you. Why is pleasure, and again, sexual or non-sexual, so important? And as I've put it, and I honestly think like this idea of it being a revolutionary act, I think I was listening to your podcast and you said something that sparked that. I don't know if you said that directly.
Yes,
but
I have.
Okay. I'm like, I think that's a Danielle way of putting it. Yeah, love it. So why is it a revolutionary act? Why is it's so important to have pleasure, to maybe even bring more pleasure into our lives and our world? And that also extends to, of course, our intimate relationships.
Yeah. Well, I'll just start with like why I believe pleasure is vital. And, the reason that I feel like pleasure is so vital to our overall well-being is, it starts just with studies. Like when we really just look at studies of how to take care of our brain and our overall well-being and what pleasure can offer us, there's tons of studies even of what orgasms can do for the brain, right? And so when we just think about it in that, just helping like your cortex, which is involved with your memory and your cognition, it can help with blood flow, heart rate, like all of your vitals, it really helps us get into that a well-balanced part of our nervous system. I don't want to say it's like full rest and digest, because there usually is a little bit of, arousal involved in that, but it's creating just a lot of, I like to think of it as like a balm for our body, right? It's like a buffer inside of our body. So when things are really hard, we have a container that's more resilient. We have like also in our mind and in our body that can really, help carry us through and serve us. And also just to have fun and to feel good. Right? Just the vitality of like the vital nature of that, of joy, of happiness, of satisfaction, of connection with our bodies, with our partners. Pleasure is a huge part. And we spend a lot of times, operating on default, like where our brain is captured by things that might be very stress inducing, or those negativity sort of, things that we see in our partners or things that are in a relationship, or we let it kind of like wear us down. And so just for the relationship you have with your partner is, pleasure is a really important part of the bonding process of that and for keeping that passion alive. So that's, just a handful of the reasons that I think that, just from that well-being perspective, but it also just helps like our focus. It allows us to be more compassionate, more present, like there's just so many things. But the reason that I see pleasure as really this revolutionary act is, well, there's a lot of reasons that it is, but one of the reasons as women is just the way that we've been socialized. It's always been that we have been objects of pleasure rather than letting pleasure be for us and be a good enough reason.
Yes.
Like that just me feeling good is a good enough reason to pursue this, or a good enough reason for this kind of connection. That is a revolutionary act when you look at the way that historically pleasure and women have kind of gone hand in hand. And also, I think that us being able to prioritize pleasure, right? And so again, we're not just talking about sexual pleasure, though that's a huge part of it, but really looking at our lives and the way we orient even our calendar or our days with pleasure at the forefront is allowing us to be in our body. It's not just like going right into the hustle culture and always doing and, giving till we have nothing left. And that in and of itself, turning it, kind of flipping the entire narrative of like, no, I'm going to take care of me for me. Like I'm really going to fill myself up is, that's revolutionary, and doing it in a sensual way, meaning connecting with your senses and not just like, a reward, like a dessert or, a piece of cake, and we're not waiting to earn it. We're not waiting to get to the end of the day. And then did we get everything done we're supposed to? Now I get to feel good, right? It's starting with like, no, I get to feel good, and allowing pleasure then to fuel our actions and fuel our day, rather than going to our pleasure practices completely drained to start with.
Yes. So beautiful. And there's so much there that you just said. It's like, wow. Right. Yeah. One of the things that's coming up for me too, in terms of like, it sounds like it's revolutionary. Like one of the things you're saying is it's revolutionary just in our own experiences of the world and like who we get to be and who we allow ourselves to be, right? With the kind of permission we give ourselves as women, which is very like giving ourselves permission. It's very for that pleasure in all those ways you described was not a thing in the past, right?
No, it's not even a thing right now. In a lot of, like it's just not a thing, like historically, and, and especially when it comes to sexuality, owning that and putting, our experience of pleasure. I mean, heterosexual women are the least sexually satisfied women or people is what I meant. The least sexually satisfied people out there. Right. And it's like, why? And it's because the way that we've been socialized to put other people's needs or, I have to focus on being desirable. And when we put pleasure and our pleasure at the forefront, it doesn't mean that we're, being selfish and like pushing everybody off to the side. We're just fueling ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves. We're making that important. And that in and of itself is revolutionary in the way that we've been socialized in a patriarchal system.
Absolutely. And it's bringing to my mind too, like what that unleashes for us in the world as human beings, right? Like, not first, but like in what we're capable of from there. And I love how you talk about it, like we don't have to have another reason other than our own well-being. I don't know if that's how you put it, right? I mean, I talk about that a lot with marriage too, is like wanting a great, amazing marriage. Like we don't have to do that for anyone but ourselves. And there's also like when we are, fueled up, like you said, when we are like, I don't know how you just put it, but like when we are fueled, we have more quote unquote power to contribute in a way that we might want to the world. And that's very true in our smaller little worlds of our marriages.
Well, to be active, right? And to like show up for the causes, whether it is like a cause or something that's important to you in your marriage or at the world at large, because pleasure really is like a fuel. And when we are just pushing and never allowing ourselves to receive, and pleasure really is an act of receiving, then we don't have, we're going off fumes. We don't even have access to like the problem solving part of our brain. We don't even have like full access to the part of our brain that's creative and courageous, and pleasure gives us that access.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing that I see in marriages, or intimate relationships is this dynamic that there's so many things that I could talk about here too, right? It's like, one of the dynamics that I can see sometimes happening where when we are not, I kind of call it treasuring. Like I call it treasuring, like when we are like loving ourselves, right? Like we're allowing ourselves pleasure in this case. When we're not doing that, and there's so many ways of doing that, and I think this topic of pleasure is perfect for this. But oftentimes, like then we're running dry, right? And kind of on empty. And I mean that energetically, but I mean it also emotionally. And sometimes what can then happen is that when we feel empty in that way, then we turn outward, we look externally to source it, right? And in a marriage, that can become a dynamic. I want to say like there's a power dynamic there that can happen, kind of where we think the answer is to get that what we know we need, right? Like to be fueled up, to feel good, right? From the outside, and it can turn into like almost kind of trying to demand it from out there. And then that can set up this very challenging dynamic in the marriage. Whereas when we flip that, when we tend to our own pleasure and fueling ourselves and treating ourselves like a treasure, then we can shift and lift the culture in our home, in our marriage, right? We don't need that as much. And then we can show up and enjoy our partner more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think it's like, it is some, like for me, I know just from my personal experience, it's like, sometimes it feels like, oh, I'm worth it, right? To like go into this. But then other times it's like, no, it's like actually like a more how like I talk to my kids. Sometimes it's not a reprimanding. It's just like a stern, like this is actually what we're doing, stern talking to like, hey, Danielle, like this is actually your responsibility. Like you didn't get married to have your partner have to just make sure that you're feeling good. Like what you said, right? Like you were responsible. I'm feeling empty. So you better like fill me up and make me feel good. Right.
Yes.
And sometimes it's hard because when you're feeling triggered and when you're feeling upset, and it's like, it's the easiest thing to just be like, it's your fault. You should appreciate me more. You should whatever. And then it's like, oh, wait, that's my job. That's my responsibility. And so it's like, yes, it sounds all great. Like, oh, I'm worth it. And giving myself pleasure. But in action, a lot of times it's more like, hey, actually, this is your responsibility. And it is a privilege that it's our responsibility, but it's still our responsibility.
Yes, totally. Totally. So actually, that's a great segue into a little bit further on the topic of, well, you brought it up before, but like, what do you think are some of the things? And I think, again, you mentioned, I don't know how you put it, but I think it's that cultural messaging, right? The conditioning that we have as women, that keeps us from kind of leaning into pleasure as much as possible.
Yeah, well, definitely in, sexual relationships, one of the things that keeps us from leaning into pleasure that I find amongst most heterosexual couples is that it's for the man, right? It's for him. It's something I give him. And even the way that it's talked about in our culture is like, did you get any, right? Or did you put out, right? Or am I going to give it to him tonight? Or like even these like just tongue in cheek sort of phrases that have become very normal in our conversation really kind of reflect the underlying message that we don't really see sex for us, like really truly something that could benefit us that we're both a part of, right? It does seem very one-sided in these objects of pleasure, and just the assumption even that the man in a heterosexual relationship is the higher drive sort of person, so it's those kind of cultural messages. And in marriages specifically, like it there's so much responsibility on women in general, or just assumptions about what we're taking care of, that it really does seem like the way that it's presented is one more thing that you should do to be like a good wife, right? Even though that sounds very 50s or like old terms, it still is played out in our culture like every day.
And what's so interesting about it too is just like, we get those messages from out there, but the fascinating thing about it is that we internalize those messages, right? So they become, they didn't come from our voice originally, right? Or our own brains originally, but they've become a part of the fabric of our brains, right? Until we start to extricate them and look at them and decide we don't want them there and change them if we want. But but
even when you're talking about like an education, right? It's like little messages maybe from your mom or your parents or, you know, your church. It's like, oh, well, you know what boys are after, you know what boys want. And, you know, and it's not even like, wait, maybe it's something that you want and it feels good. And it's not something we have to be afraid of. Like there's so many ways that sex has been, and sex and pleasure in general have been presented to women as something to be fearful of, something that negative, you know, whether it's like, don't indulge too much, or like, ooh, I'm going to give myself this treat because I was quote unquote good this week, so I deserve a piece of cake, you know, or, you know, so there's so many ways that the way that women have been taught about pleasure and about sexuality is really, there's a lot of fear integrated in those messages. And it makes it a bit scary to like move towards pleasure and really see that it is for us and not a duty, not an obligation, and also not something that's going to harm us in the long run.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, one of the things that comes into my mind as I think about some of my clients, well, I mean, I think it's a lot of us as women and maybe even just our culture in general, or humans in our culture, is like one of the things that I find that can get in the way for people also is like tying our worth to how successful we are, how productive we are, how well we fit into certain standards. And then it's kind of like, then we get in the rat race, if that makes sense, right? Instead of creating the space in our lives for these things, for pleasure, right? For the things that really fuel us, for that really light us up, that really give us meaning.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like you know, even in our marriages or even in our friendships, right? Like in our friendships, it's not like you can go and you could, but we don't typically like go into a friend circle, or like when I pick up my kids and I have these like couple of moments with like a group of adults, I'm not like, oh my gosh, I had the best orgasm last night. Right? Like you don't typically like talk about like, oh, I'm feeling so happy and pleasured and orgasmic and all of these sorts of things, you know. And so we have also made it, like you said, socially acceptable to share some of our achievements, or like, ooh, you know, I'm, you know, I got my PhD recently, or we bought a house, or we did all these things. And so even when it comes to celebrating and feeling successful, you know, it's like hard work. It's something that we can talk about, being productive, achievements. These are all things that have been socially acceptable to talk about as far as being successful, where simply feeling good, feeling satisfied, being happy, being calm and grounded isn't typically what we get our merit badge for.
Yeah. And it also, like, some of my experience with pleasure in my life in general and sexual pleasure, like what some barriers for me has been this, like putting so much of my energy into, you know, my work and kind of trying to accomplish and achieve, you know, I've grown a lot in this way, but that was definitely a barrier for me, and can still be sometimes, where I sort of zap all my energy and I don't create space or time or have the energy right? Or that's like the story that comes up is like, there's just nothing left, in other words.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's a hard, I want to say it's a habit, right? It's a really hard habit to create. It's something that I notice even every single morning. It's like my resistant brain, right? It's like, oh, I have to jump right into my to-do list, or I have these emails to write, or I have to get back to this client, or I have blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like the list of to-dos.
Yes.
And it takes that active moment of awareness to be like, no, actually, brain, there's plenty of time with that. First, we're going to connect with our body. First, we're going to drop in, and it's a habit of the mind to be in that constant state of doing rather than just being and feeling.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to chime in here and say I'm proud of myself today for interrupting that habit and spending about 40 minutes doing yoga nidra, which is one of the things that I derive so much pleasure from.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so,
I love it.
But it's still challenging because that habit and that pattern's so strong, right? To just keep doing the to-do list.
Yes. Yeah. Keep working on the business instead of like going and making out with your husband. That was the biggest one for me. I was like, but I just have this one thing on my website real quick. And it was like, no, I need to go, jump his bones. That's actually what's important.
Right. Exactly. And, for different people, it's different things. One of the things I hear from my clients a lot is like, I need to clean the house. Like, I mean, obviously it's like, because a lot of highly sensitive women do really find that the cleanliness of their environment really important. And so it can be like, no, I don't have time. I've got to deal with the house. It's a mess, right? Things like that. So
I can relate.
Yeah. So I think the question on everyone's mind, is my guess, who's listening, is how then do we open up to more pleasure in general? And I want to talk, like in general, and then, of course, specifically when it comes to pleasure in sex. And if you have, a few tips.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes it goes really hand in hand, because what we're really trying to work on is creating like a sensitivity to pleasure. Right. So,
and I love that for my people. Let me just pause and interrupt you for a second. I love it when anytime we use sensitivity, because sensitivity is such a beautiful thing. And I love to just like highlight that for my people, because they're so used to thinking of sensitivity in a negative way. So sensitivity is a good thing here too.
It is. And the way that I like to think about sensitivity, sometimes being a highly sensitive person myself, is like part of it, a huge part of it is attention. Where is your attention by default going? And so what we're doing is we're helping train our brain to become more sensitive, or redirect it to sensations that feel good, to pleasurable sensations. It's not to say that we're ignoring pain or hard things, or we're trying to buffer away, but it's seeing how we are more than one, and we're more than one at any given time. And oftentimes we're just focused on the things that are hard or don't feel good, or the discomfort. And so helping your brain turn towards the pleasure, turn towards something that feels at ease. And so when you are doing pleasure practices on purpose, whether it's that first sip of tea or coffee, or it's, I do a practice, you probably remember this, Hannah, like in the morning, like touching your body, and putting lotion on, and really receiving the touch in a pleasurable way. All of these things are helping your brain be like, oh yeah, like I remember how to, receive pleasure. I remember how to turn towards pleasure, so that when you are having sex, it is easier then to direct your mind, because it is used to pleasure practices. It's used to turning towards pleasure in general. So that's kind of like, the bigger scope, but also when it comes to sex, to understand that, yes, we're using a lot of these mindfulness and mind body techniques, but also helping see what's happening in your brain
Mm-hmm.
during
Yes.
and leading up to that is creating tension in your body. So
Mm.
that's where that like awareness comes in, is like, oh, well, if I'm thinking like he just wants, just wants a piece, well, how does that make you feel in your body? Like when I think that thought, it's like crumbling, like someone just punched me in the gut. It's not good. It's not pleasurable.
No, I know.
Right?
Totally. I know for me, that was a big one that you really helped me with.
Yeah.
Because I was like, if it's just like that, it's just for him, right? Like I'm doing this for him. It's like, there's just like, for me, it's like my body constricts and I just like feel heavy and hard. And I just want to be like, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like becoming aware of like, what are some of the things that you're believing that you might not even be aware of? Like a lot of women I talk to, they're thinking like, oh, this is going to take so long, or, oh, I'd rather just be sleeping. Let's get this over quick. There's so many like little kind of thoughts that are going to have an impact on how you feel in your body. And they actually, like you said, they restrict, they constrict, they create tension, which makes it really hard to access pleasure, like really hard to receive pleasurable sensations. So, yes, it's turning towards pleasure, but also like spending some time seeing like, what are some of the things that I'm believing during sex leading up to it that I might not even be aware of, that's shutting my body down before we've even begun.
Totally. And that just like, as you were speaking, I was thinking about my blue hammock seat that's outside the window. Sit there. And it's obviously like I go to that to feel pleasure and to relax. And obviously this isn't sexual pleasure, but it's like I often
like, is it a sex hammock?
Is it a sex hammock? It's not. I don't know. Yeah. And I was just thinking what you were saying is so applicable when it's non-sexual pleasure as well, right? Because like those little thoughts, kind of like we were talking about earlier, is like, I have those little thoughts. It's like, oh, I should do this. Oh, there's that thing. Oh yeah, I remember that thing, right? When I'm out there enjoying my amazing hammock on my beautiful porch with like the birds singing, right? Like that, like taking those moments to like, it's that brain clutter, all those little thoughts, just to seem kind of harmless, but they take me away, right? It's like my body constricts. I'm not able to enjoy the amazing pleasure that's available to me in that moment.
Exactly. And, so I think it's like, paying attention to your mind, like redirecting your attention. And, the other tip I would say is like, really start to like, imagine what it is you want, like practicing it, in your body. And I don't mean like practicing the motions, but practicing the possibility of pleasure, like practicing, or just like imagining what it would be like to be a pleasured woman, or if you just had amazing sex or orgasm. Like we have to, really see what we're going towards and going forwards, and not just like what has been historically our experience, because for a lot of us, it's not always good. And we don't want to get fixated on the problems and seeing instead what it is we're working towards and trying to create.
Yeah. So in other words, like spending time in the vision and the experience of what's possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I love that so much. I mean, that's I don't talk about that a lot in the podcast, but it's definitely a big part of when I, working with my clients is spending time in that space, because that is what allows our brain to then shift and change. And so that it is actually easier to, in this case, open to pleasure. And
yes.
Yeah. I love it. And, one thing, like just kind of to follow up on what we were talking about, what we touched on a few times, like one tip that you helped me with, and I know is helps so many women to hear this, is just that, like, for me, really, really shifted things for me when I started thinking about how the pleasure is such a benefit to me. Like sex benefits me in so many ways, right? It's so life-giving to me, right? And it's not a duty for him. It's not for him. I mean, sure, it is too.
Yeah.
But like that shifting in my thinking really has changed so much for me.
Yes. And another, this just came to my mind as I was thinking about, highly sensitive, like just a practical tip, because these are big kind of like meta, things for you to focus on, but just a really practical tip, like knowing that you're highly sensitive, it can be very distracting because we have a lot of things coming at us at once, right? So the sensory overload.
Yes.
And so helping yourself, like, eliminate some of that is so helpful when it comes to sex. So for me, I'm somebody that like pays attention to temperature, and I tend to get really cold unless it's like a hot summer day, right? So like doing things ahead of time, like I wear wool socks and sometimes maybe even like an open cardigan. Like it might not be the sexiest, but I don't really care because I'm not going to be distracted by the fact that my feet are cold. Or, for a while, I even had to wear earplugs, like for me. And it's like, your partner, you can explain to them, but like not having to hear things also helped me tune into sensation. Especially when I'm really highly aroused, like not aroused from sex, but like, like from like external stimulation. Like, yes, like closing my eyes. So, anything that you can really do to help yourself, really paying attention to, the senses. So it's like, I'm sensitive to taste too. So it's like, hey, honey, like I don't really mind your bad breath, but I don't want to think about it. So could you please brush your teeth? I'm going to wear earplugs. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to make sure I'm warm. These kind of things that help you really focus on the sensation of touch, which will help you get aroused and be more in your body and in the moment too.
Yeah, it's so good. I remember talking to you about the teeth brushing thing. I don't know. I like have super nose, and it's just like, it's not like my husband's breath is bad, but like if he's had more garlic than I've had, it's like he has just a tiny bit more garlic. And I'm like, whoa.
Yes, exactly. Like I can smell things like at my neighbor's house, I swear. And so it's like, if I'm going to have sex, I don't want to be distracted by other things that are, taking my attention away, but also turning me off in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to add to that. Like, I can almost hear some people, like some of my clients have expressed, like, sometimes it can be hard to ask for these things because we have thoughts about what it means, or we're worried it's going to upset them or burden our partner or whatever, or being perceived as too sensitive. Right. So I just want to add that, like, requesting those things, if it does involve making a request, like brushing your teeth, honey, like it ends up being a gift to him too, because like he wants to make love for sure. And he loves the experience. So like it's for both of you, and it's going to make your experience so much more pleasurable for both of you.
Yeah. And I think it's like really working on, like you said, your own thoughts about it, because if you don't see it as being a problem or being weird or even owning the weirdness of it, like I just straight up told my husband, I was like, this might be weird, but like, these are our business socks now. Like these are like thick wool socks, I'm going to be closing my eyes, and just like matter of factly explaining, this is what I will be doing. And these are the reasons, because I want to have all of the orgasmic experiences with you. When you just own it in that way and you don't feel like it's a problem, you don't feel like it's a burden, you're showing your partner also how to, receive the request or receive, just your new habits that you're enacting.
Yes. And what Danielle just said is an amazing advice for any kind of communication that we're doing in a relationship. So much of it comes down to what we're believing and how good, how much we have our back on what we believe, what we're thinking, what we're asking for. Right. Yeah. So good. Well, oh my gosh. I want to, ask if there's any other last little thing you want to share, any other little last thing
Well, the only other thing that like came to mind with me, just, being a highly sensitive person is like also understanding, throughout the day, we can be triggered a lot. We can feel kind of that, when you hop into that highly aroused state, or you have maybe gone down to that more like avoidance, numbing out or like kind of closed off state, is really thinking about, if you have, I recommend this for everybody, schedule sex, because so you can think of these things and prepare, but also just like, if you're in one of these states, like giving yourself time and space to kind of open that window that you can be more receptive. Because when we're in one of these states where we're closed off or we're highly aroused, it can be really hard to. So just acknowledging that about yourself, it's like, there's certain times of the day, maybe you had a stressful day. I have kids, like dinner time can always be kind of crazy. And so if I know that a sexy time is coming up, I make sure I create that space before I'm meeting my partner to meet my body and meet my nervous system and help myself like be more at ease. Because if you're in either one of these kind of, opposite stages, which we tend to be a lot, how can I help myself kind of breathe into or create more space for this like window of receptivity, which is often shut down when we've been triggered by multiple things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked a lot about, I think as highly sensitive people, that is one of the biggest areas of our work, or that we could, our ability, what do I want to say, like our growth, right there, to learn how to I sometimes call it nervous system shepherding, or, just stewarding ourselves to a space of, we might call it like the calm and connect part of our system, right? Or less in those like freeze or flight places. And, so like that, there are, for anyone who's listening, is just like a new listener, like there are a lot of episodes on this podcast that do discuss like how to like not be in either of those, or like how to help ourselves move back to that place. Because it's huge for us in all ways as highly sensitive people.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up here too. Well, oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here. It's been a true pleasure.
Yay. Thank you. I've had such a good time, and I hope this is helpful for all you highly sensitive folks getting a little bit more pleasure in your life.
Yes. So important. So yummy. So where can people find more of you?
Well, I've recently taken a little break from social media. You can still find me there, even though I'm not actively hanging out there at the moment. And so my Instagram is just at Danielle.Savory. You can find me through my website. I'm sure that Hannah can put down that we hang out in the Turned On Woman group. And it's a membership. And so we work on all of this. And so that's a great way just to start doing these type of practices. And then my podcast, It's My Pleasure, is another place that you can follow me.
Yes, definitely follow Danielle. She's got so much more where all this came from.
Well, thank you again. This has been super fun.
Yes, so fun to have you here. Thank you so much. And to all my listeners, be oh so well.